Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 26th of February 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson, and we'll be joined by
Skype
by David Scott with Northern Exposure. Just a pause there, I had to think of that word. It's the end of the month already, which is surprising us, and I think a few other people are surprised at the speed at which time seems to be going, but there we are. Weather at the moment in Plymouth is pretty gloomy. We understand that up in Perthshire there's sunshine peeping through, and according to our chat box there's insipid sunshine in Norfolk. So we'll leave the weather and go on to happier events such as the EU referendum.
Yes, because David Cameron is again choosing somewhere where he pretends we manufacture things to give more discussion about the EU referendum. And actually this is a mildly amusing article here from Michael Deacon in The Telegraph, because he's really taking the mickey out of Cameron and the whole sort of fear porn aspect of this EU referendum so far. So, you know, in his speech, he was, of course, talking about how if we leave the European Union, we'll be at much greater danger from ISIS and from Vladimir Putin. But the one that really got Michael Deacon was you've also got to think of the prices in the shops, because apparently the prices in the shops are going to go up if we leave the EU. Now, there may be... So maybe that's the one risk that perhaps, I'm going to ask David to comment on this in a second, is perhaps the one risk that is relatively genuine, because of course we have seen the worst performance by the pound in this last week for a number of years. And is this just the markets giving their opinion of what would happen if Britain left the EU, or is there some kind of George Soros-like activity going on? I don't think anybody really knows exactly what's going on, other than just to say that the markets are giving their opinion. David, what do you think is the danger, the threat to sterling in the event that people decide to leave the EU?
Well, just a quick word firstly on if we leave, prices will go up. That's an interesting one. Because when we joined the common market as it was then, prices went up. So if we leave, they go up again. So what they're trying to say is that the common market, the European Union, with all of its bureaucracy and state control over industry, is actually generating prices for food and other essentials below the level of the world market. That is clearly not true. That's in fact economically illiterate to even say such a thing. So clearly, if we leave the EU, prices will go down unless one of our wise overlords acts to stop it. And as far as sterling goes, well, sterling goes up, sterling goes down. What's it really based on? Some of it is certainly the short-term stuff, is Soros-like speculation. The longer term health or otherwise of the pound will depend on our ability to create, manufacture, and be efficient. Now, I don't think that we're short of problems in that area, but it's nothing really to do with the EU.
Well, indeed. So what's going on in Scotland? What's the Scottish view of this?
Yes, the Scottish view is somewhat unique and not without its funny side. But we'll get to that in a moment. This first article here is a Herald article. Now, the Herald is a nationalist supporting newspaper, and they're talking about four-nation consent. So for us to leave the EU, both Scotland, England, Ireland and Wales have to independently vote to leave. We can't sum up the votes over the whole nation as though we were a single country, because that would be against the viewpoint of nationalism. So we're looking for this almost impossible to get four-nation consent. So that's the nationalist view. And if we don't get that, well, there'll be trouble, Mike.
What kind of trouble?
Well, apparently it's going to cause a another independence referendum in Scotland. Now, not very long ago, you may recall Alex Salmond telling us that the independence referendum was a once-in-a-generation, perhaps even a once-in-a-lifetime event. Well, it transpires that generations and lifetimes are not what they used to be, some sort of inflation perhaps, and we're now looking at an independence referendum being called again if Scotland is taken out of Europe by a nationwide, UK-wide vote, but the vote within Scotland is to stay in. A scenario which could happen, given the fact that it's quite a knife-edge vote anyway, a scenario which could easily come about. The view that Scotland is pro-Europe and England is Eurosceptic is very much an oversimplification. This next slide here is from the most Eurosceptic, talking about the most Eurosceptic constituency in Scotland, and it's Alex Salmond's own Banff and Buchan.
Sorry, that's one constituency. It's not two. It's not two constituencies.
Yes, Banff and Buchan's
Right.
one parliamentary Westminster constituency. Now, why would that be? Well, when we joined the EU, the EU EEC, as it was at the time, had no real experience of dealing with fish and fish stocks, and they found that the North Sea and the fishing stocks within British waters were available, and they really made a play which was beyond the narrow reading of the Treaty of Rome and the other treaties. They made a play to claim it as a common asset. And our wise overlords at the time, the Heath government, were fooled by this and basically gave away our fishing industry. Now, that was based on the east coast of England to some extent, and hugely in the northeast of Scotland, where it's a very major employment engine, an engine of the economy. And it was hammered by the maladministration, overfishing, bureaucratic control, etc., brought by the Common Market, Common Fisheries Policy. So, yeah, there are many places in Scotland where there's no love lost for the EU, and they would dearly like to be short of the thing.
Well, you wanted us to highlight a couple of tweets here. We should never forget the lessons of history and not turn our backs on neighbours who want to help at this time. This seems to be Angus Robertson.
This is Angus Robertson. This is Angus Robertson, and just consider what he's saying here. It's unbelievable. And the SNP tweeted it out, and the SNP retweeted this Sky tweet, which shows him saying it live in the House of Commons. We must think about our neighbours and remember the lessons of history, and stay in the EU. Just let the sheer stupidity of that sink in for a moment. Neighbours, well, it was brought out, there's a parody account in Scotland called the Scottie National, which mocks the pro-nationalist view of the national newspaper. And they absolutely nailed this one, this idea of neighbours. We must look after our neighbours. And here you see the map. We have neighbours, shaded purple here, and we have not neighbours. So the policy of the Scottish National Party is to stick close in a loving embrace with our neighbours, but to run a mile from the non-neighbours. Could you give any sort of rational explanation for this? This is why the whole EU debate has a slightly surreal air in Scotland, and one not without the comedy value, because the nationalist government has argued for a long time. Back in 1975, the nationalists were solidly against the EU membership. But for a long time, the nationalists have argued that we need to be in the EU because we need to be in part of this big club and a group of nations and a bigger market. And at the same time, they've argued the exact reverse in terms of being within Britain. Now they're going to have to argue the exact reverse in a month and a half, because we're going to be going into a Scottish election, May 5, and we're going to be arguing, the Nationalists are going to be arguing that we want to be separate from Britain, and being separate won't hurt cross-border trade. We can thrive as an independent nation. We don't need to be part of this bigger conglomeration of nations. And then immediately after that, they're going to flip. They're going to change the T-shirts. They'll say something opposite, and they're going to campaign to remain in the big group of nations. It's bizarre, and it completely lacks any coherence.
David, one of the keys to this for me is the fact that you no longer see politicians interviewed as an individual on TV. My memory goes back quite a long way now, but if we go back sort of 30 years, then you would see individual MPs were the ones who were interviewed on a particular subject. And if it was the Defence Secretary, they were the ones who answered the questions. If there was somebody, an event in somebody's constituency, that constituency MP answered the questions. But now we don't see any of this. We simply see a mass media answer on all these subjects. And if we pick off the veneer, of course, we find that we have people embedded everywhere in the SNP, in the Conservatives, in Labour, in what remains of the Lib Dems, embedded to ensure that the right political viewpoint goes past. So we are seeing political answers here, not the answers which come out of the brains of individuals who've got some intelligence and can use common sense. This is propaganda operating here.
It is, and it's a very interesting point you make, because it has a particular resonance in Scotland. Because of all the parties that stick to a line and toe the line, the most rigid adherence to the party line comes from Britain's third largest party, the SNP. This is being now commented on in Holyrood in Parliament during this week's First Minister's questions, where people are saying, why is it that the SNP MSPs will say one thing in private to us, that they're against named person, or that they have doubts about Europe, or whatever it happens to be, but when they get in the chamber and when they're on television, these doubts, these concerns, these independent views no longer exist. Rigid discipline is not good when it comes to an exchange of ideas.
No.
So the Scottish word of the week then was glaikit.
Glaikit, yes, I thought glaikit was good. We haven't had a Scots word of the week for a couple of weeks now. Alex covered it with scunnered not so long ago. Glaikit is, I think, a good description of exactly how we are campaigning for both independence and non-independence in the same 2-month period. It means fully stupid. And easily gullible, and generally naive, and that I think would be a good word to have in your dictionary when talking about Scottish politics.
Does it apply to Nicola Sturgeon?
Well, let us see how she handles this. So far, yes. So far, it most certainly does, because what she's saying here is that if we have a no vote, if we have a vote to exit the EU, this will almost certainly trigger a new independence referendum. Now, what is on display there is the assumption that some of the people who voted no to stay in the UK will be so appalled by leaving the EU that they will reverse their votes. But none of the people, or not very many of the people who voted yes for an independent Scotland, will be likewise appalled by the prospect of being ruled from Brussels. There is no evidence for this. There's no indication that this is going to change the views of the Scottish people. There's no indication that there's going to be a groundswell of demand for a new independence referendum. There's no indication about which direction they would actually move any vote. But it's just political opportunism to try and start to build momentum for what they see as quite a likely scenario.
And that would be unstoppable momentum?
Yes, unstoppable momentum is what they're looking for. They have many, many problems to call another referendum. The biggest one is 55% of the Scottish population voted no, not very long ago. September 2014. They have to convince these people, 55% of us, to even entertain a new referendum, to turn up and vote, to take part. There has to be a no campaign. Lamentable though it was last time round, it was called Operation Fear. And again, there are lots of parallels between the fear being generated to keep us in the EU, fear that the nationalists support and applaud and indeed repeat, and the fear that was used to keep us in the UK, fear that the nationalists opposed and pointed out the lack of ideas and lack of a positive message. So, you know, fear is sometimes good, sometimes bad. The whole thing from a Scottish perspective is riddled with contradictions and irony.
Now, there's something reasonably significant about the date of the referendum, and it's not just the fact that it's in the middle of the European Football Championships.
I noticed this last night when I just thought I'll check what is actually on the 23rd of June. It must be the anniversary of something. Turns out it's the anniversary of the first day of the Battle of Bannockburn, when Scotland rid itself of oppressive English control and became much freer as a result. Did David Cameron pick that on purpose, or maybe he just doesn't know Scottish history? That is entirely possible.
Well, yeah, who knows? It's just one of those coincidences, isn't it? Strange coincidence.
So you wanted to comment on the last referendum?
Yes, there's a very good documentary on this. It's available on YouTube. And I would recommend, if anyone's got 45 minutes to an hour to spare, it's well worth looking at this and just seeing how it was done last time, because we are seeing so many of the themes repeated. So here we see the scores on the doors here. At the start of the campaign, the no vote, which was the leave vote, had about 67% of the support in the polls. And yes, to stay in the EU was languishing at 33, and it completely reversed during the course of the campaign, which is an enormous turnaround. And it does make you wonder how exactly that was achieved. Now, one of the reasons it was achieved is all of the political big hitters were solidly pro-EU, including one recently elected leader of the Conservative Party, Margaret Thatcher. There you see her in her pan-European jumper with all the flags of all the nations, proudly campaigning for the Yes campaign to be in what was then the European Economic Community. Of course, it wasn't the EU just then. And let us remember that at the time, the Party of Europe was the Conservative Party. The party split down the middle by the European question was the Labour Party. And we had subsequently many things such as the Single European Act signed by Margaret Thatcher, who we now remember as a great Eurosceptic, which took us much, much deeper into the EU. So a strange turnaround. The only party that's actually been consistent, the Nationalists have all changed sides, the only party that's been consistent is actually the Liberals are now Liberal Democrats, who have been solidly pro-EU the whole time.
A comment in the chat box is that this lot looks like Call My Bluff. But anyway, okay, and Lord McAlpine as well.
Yes, the other thing is, okay, we had political control, we had political heavy hitters on the Yes side. What else did we have? Well, we had enormous quantities of cash. They actually raised, and the head fundraiser was Alistair McAlpine. They actually raised twice as much money as they managed to spend. Now, the McAlpine family at the time owned the Dorchester, so they were inviting MPs round for breakfast at the Dorchester, and it was a buffet breakfast. And the reason it was a buffet breakfast is then there was no waiters to overhear what was being said. And we had left-wing Labour firebrands and right-wing Tories and all the rest of it would be brought together over a very good breakfast, and they would discuss tactics. The money flowed in. The money flowed in from, you might be astounded to hear, the banking interests. It also flowed in from big industrialists, and it also flowed in directly from the European Commission, who funded a whole series of flights on British Caledonian, if you remember that airline, with all the stewardesses wore tartan uniforms and little kilts, and it was very popular at the time. The European Commission funded a whole series of charter flights on British Caledonian to take people, politicians, journalists, etc., people involved in the Yes campaign, on trips to Brussels, to Luxembourg, to see the European institutions at work, so they could come back to Britain and tell us how wonderful and shiny and new it all was. So it was extremely well funded. Almost every paper, every newspaper in this country was solidly pro-EU, apart from the Spectator and the Morning Star were the only two that actually said, no, we shouldn't be in this. So we had complete saturation press coverage, we had all the political heavy hitters, and we had all the money that was possible to spend backing a Yes, Stay In campaign. Meanwhile, the No campaign was vilified as being a bunch of extremist nut jobs. So here you see the cartoon here. We see the Scottish nationalists, the Trotskyists, the National Front, the Communist Party. Just off the shot there, we've got the Orange Order. And so we've got all these extremists, a strange bag of people brought together for this one campaign, many with nothing in common. In fact, the two leading lights in this campaign were Tony Benn and Enoch Powell. And Benn wouldn't actually share a platform with Enoch Powell, so that hardly helped. So they were very much painted, if you were against the EU, as being actually possibly certifiably insane, certainly extreme and odd and weird, and Europe was portrayed as being the only rational, sane choice. I think we're going to see a bit of that again.
And indeed, we're going to see we see the fear in that past campaign as well. The fear card being played: vote yes to keep the peace, and better a little national sovereignty than a son or a daughter.
Now, this was, I was quite shocked by this, that they actually was as brass-necked as that, to say that and put that on a poster, because that was a cut from a live a Yes campaign poster that went up across Britain. Better to lose a little national sovereignty. Notice we're not claiming we're not losing sovereignty, we're accepting we are. Than a son or a daughter, which was reference obviously to the bloody history of 2 world wars, which in 1975 was all the closer. And, you know, we had a good part of the population had lived through it, or had parents that lived through it. So you had that very much resonated in a way that it perhaps doesn't now. But I heard just the other day a politician saying, you know, this isn't about us, it's about our children and the safety of our children. That making exactly the same point, slightly less obviously, slightly less in your face, but it's the same point, yeah. That what the EU has done is has maintained the peace. Now, this is not true. What has maintained the peace is, since the Second World War, Western Europe has been part of an extended American empire. They've all been essentially beholding to the power of America as vassal states, politically and militarily speaking. Now, in situations like this, the vassal states are simply not allowed to fight one another because it's not in the interests of the imperial power. That's what's kept the peace in Europe. Nothing to do with the EU or the fact that we have a common market or the ability to cross borders without restriction. Now, trade does keep the peace, because when goods don't cross borders, armies do. But of course, trade can be achieved simply by having free trade. We don't need to have political control to have free trade.
David, if I may, just to come back a little bit to the deviousness of the campaign, I totally agree with your comments on what's kept peace in Europe, and it's certainly not the European Union. But it was brought to my attention this morning, Vote Leave campaign. This is a particularly bland visual which we're going to put on screen. I've done it deliberately because when you visit this amazing Vote Leave website, it's very hard to see who is behind it and what it's really doing. And on the contact page where I finally came to, you can really see for yourself. It's all very bland, but it's got a very strong message that we should be out of Europe, but really not that out, because it then pushes all of the trade things. But this was part of the fun of it, because we think it's really vote leave to stay in the EU. And somebody pointed out that this gentleman, Pierre Shepherd, he's a vote leave researcher. I've suggested he might be a Europhile, because if you have a look at his career, of course he is absolutely an EU man. But he appears to be one of the mysterious people behind Vote Leave, which doesn't like to say who actually runs them. It's very murky, this stuff, it seems to me. Perhaps, sorry, go ahead.
Yes, and the parallels to, with the 75 campaign to now, and the parallels with the Scottish independence referendum are enormous. We had in 75 Ben and Powell. Now we've got Farage and left-wing firebrand from Dundee, Mr. George Galloway. There's certainly a similarity here. Now, one of the other things that was most noticeable in the Scottish independence campaign is that it was being sold, keeping within the EU, undoubtedly was being sold on fear. And there was an inability to make a coherent pro-Great Britain, pro-United Kingdom case. It strangely went by default. And I wonder if we're going to see that again here, whether the Vote Leave campaign will actually manage to summon a proper, coherent worldview that shows another way forward for this country other than being an offshore extension of the greater European project.
I think that's unlikely, bearing in mind the personalities involved. Let's move on, David, because time's running on. So we wanted to cover this subject, community safety partnership, and we start off with this, as Brian says, horrific logo, which is clearly an eye. It's also clearly a maze. Tell us about this.
If you're going to have a logo to worry people and to actually allow people like the UK column to know where you're coming from, this is it. Now, I happened upon these two very nice gentlemen in a supermarket in Perth a few nights ago, and they were wearing very smart and clearly very new jackets that had Community Warden written on them. So I was asking them, what's that and what do you do? And they were explaining that they're there to prevent antisocial behaviour and protect the peace. So I thought that was quite an interesting answer, and has several implications for what our police, what the wonderful Unified Police Scotland are doing. So this is a substitute police force under the control of the local authority, Perth and Kinross Council. So we did a little further research on exactly what they're doing. And it reveals, if you bring the next slide in there, what the safer community wardens are actually there. They go out, they patrol the streets, they're interested in antisocial behaviour. They're also quite closely tied up with the local authority housing departments and the problems they have with tenants behaving in ways that disturb the enjoyment of other tenants of the property. So they've gone from having a housing problem to having a social problem to having essentially an introductory police force. And it even has an investigatory arm. They have 5 investigators in Perth and Kinross Council who presumably are mostly involved in such matters as antisocial behaviour and neighbourhood disputes and things like this, where Perth and Kinross Council are the landlord.
David, I see, just before we go on a little bit, if we just go back to this one again, they also have their own Hitler Youth there.
Yes, we are getting them young, yes.
So junior community wardens, children in primary schools are given awareness training in a fun environment about community safety and personal responsibility. That's dangerous.
Yeah, well, everything in Scottish schools now is a bit worrying because we have happy clappy shinary songs, and we're teaching children to sing songs about their rights, and the right to privacy is not one of the rights they're taught to sing about. So there are many things to do with what the state is choosing to educate our young people in that are of great concern, and indeed hasn't that always been the case with state-run education.
So new areas being added, and they are going to cover more towns and villages in Perthshire.
Yes, and this is. I discovered that this had been going on for several years. I hadn't noticed this before, and the scheme is expanding all the time.
So did you notice it just because they got their new uniforms? Is that why they've stood out a bit more?
Yes, I think so. They were just wandering around Tesco, and I thought it was interesting. Wonder what they were. So I got chatting to them. I'd have to say the two gentlemen I was talking to were far nicer and more approachable as a human being than most members of Police Scotland tend to be. The same night, I'd reason to go to Perth Police Station to ask a question about police identifying themselves in Scotland, because police in Scotland, I think it's different in England, but police in Scotland do not require to identify themselves in terms of giving the name, only their badge number, their lapel number. They don't have to tell you what their name is. And I was checking that this was right, so I went to see the desk sergeant to see if this was actually correct. And a less pleasant human being you could barely find on the face of the planet in terms of interacting with the public. He really, he was really awful. So my experience on the night was that the community safety wardens were in fact doing a better job at communicating with the public. But does that not in itself show a major failing in our police force, that they are unable to communicate with the public, that are unable to interact with lawful citizens, that are unable to have a situation where they're supported by the public, where they can understand the public concerns because they are increasingly remote?
So it is spreading to other areas. So we've got Stirling Council with theirs. We've got Wales as well, and also Kent, and they're talking about the Kent aspect of this in the chat box at the moment, and they're saying that the Kent documentation says they don't make arrests. So what are they actually able to do? Do we know?
Well, I don't know. I imagine they're bound by the same rules that bind the rest of us. I mean, anyone can make an arrest, but you have to catch someone in the act. You can't arrest on suspicion the way that a policeman can. You actually have to have pretty hard and fast evidence, and you've got to get it right, because if you get it wrong, you could be up on assault charges. So I'm sure they have the powers that the citizen have, but those are very severely limited. Now, I caught a very interesting interview on the Tom Woods show this week with a private sector firm operating in Detroit to reduce crime. And they've had enormous success. They've been there for 20 years. And the chap who founded this had initially no money, but a lot of martial arts training. He was ex-military. He was loaded with lots of guns of high caliber. And he very quickly found that the best way to approach this was not with guns and aggression, but in fact with cameras and information. And he has had enormous success in improving the crime statistics. I mean, vast success, night and day type turnarounds in some of the worst parts of Detroit. And he's done this with the support of the local community. He's done this by not going after people for parking tickets and speeding fines and whether you're wearing your seatbelt. He's only interested in assaults on property and assaults on people. It's only violence and theft that he concerns himself with. And the ability to have people on the street with video cameras has actually been enormously successful.
Okay, so let's move on then. Tell us what's going on with the child abuse inquiry in Scotland at the moment.
Yes, here we have the wonderful tartan-clad Angela Constance. Now, I have to apologise to people who have to adjust their sets to actually focus on this. I would have to say that this is one of Angela's more downbeat downbeat outfits. She's moved on now from tartan to something that looks like World War One dazzle camouflage. So she's safe from U-boats anyway. She has set up this inquiry. The inquiry has a terms of reference set by the Scottish Government that exclude almost all, or certainly the vast majority, of the child abuse victims, because it's only if you're in residential care, you abuse in residential care, that the inquiry is even interested in your story. This is clearly been rumbled by the many survivors groups who are now stating loudly that there's no prospect of justice from this inquiry. So there's a lot of pressure coming on the Scottish Government and on the inquiry to actually do something approximating to their job.
And you wanted to make a comment about Rotherham as well?
Yes, it's worth, this is an excellent article in the Times here. It's worth just, if I can read out a paragraph or two quickly. It's by Andrew Norfolk, Chief Investigative Reporter. It says, corrupt police and an influential politician fueled a culture of impunity that allowed three brothers to own the town of Rotherham and abuse children until the crimes were exposed by the Times. One officer had sex with underage girls, passed drugs to the sex grooming gang and tipped them off when colleagues were searching for missing children, the court was told. Another helped to broker a deal in which one brother returned an abused girl to police after receiving the assurance that he, quote, wouldn't get done. The jury was told that Jangir Akhtar, the former deputy leader of Rotherham Council, also took part in the handover at a petrol station. Mr Akhtar, the former deputy chairman of South Yorkshire Police and Crime Panel, was a relative of the family who were doing this. The family, Hussein family, behaved for years like a pack of animals and pursued dozens of young girls, demanding sex, often with threats of violence. So that shows you the degree to which interaction with politicians, corrupt police officers, was necessary in order for this abuse to happen as extensively and over such a prolonged period without anybody actually stopping it. As we've seen so often in the child sexual abuse realm, what we need is not more laws, what we need is not more inquiries. What we need is, in fact, the ability of the police to, in fact, uphold the law.
Indeed, and just to give a bit of extra background to why this may have happened in Rotherham, I just want to highlight the Rotherham Common Purpose Effect article on the UK website written by Martin Edwards, because we are drawing certain conclusions about the networks involved and how they were protecting each other. So have a look at that article as well. Okay, Inverness Courier here talking about £29 million of council cuts. Have you any idea how much Inverness Council would have in its untouchable reserves by any chance?
No, I don't. It's a very interesting question. I'll try and find out. This is Inverness Council was the trial council, was the trailblazing council for the named person scheme. So they're bemoaning the fact that the child services and the third sector child services are going to be cut. Now, frankly, from our point of view, this is not entirely a bad thing. We've got a council which is very aggressively running families. We're having far too much intervention. We're having families having very bad experiences. Frankly, the only thing to do in circumstances like this is to take their funding away. So I think it's interesting that this is happening, that we have a series of budget cuts coming from Holyrood, which are causing serious cuts, hard cuts in Scottish local authorities. But from a point of view of personal liberty, this actually is entirely beneficial. So we will see which side that comes down on, whether we actually see an increase in liberty because the council are having to rein in their activities.
With an eye on the clock here, we're switching subjects dramatically because we're moving over to Israel, but you've got one article to do with United Jerusalem Year in Israeli schools, and you've got another one here, Israeli military relinquishes the role of the world's most moral army. Now, the second one I'm particularly interested in because I've got a couple of follow-up slides. But over to you. I'll just bring the other one back so that you can contrast the two. United Jerusalem Year in Israeli schools and the world's most moral army. What's going on here?
Well, if you look at the first of those, the one with all the flags, that is Damascus Gate. Okay. Now, Damascus Gate is located, it's a gate to the old city of Jerusalem. It's located in East Jerusalem and faces the main commercial hub of the Arab part of the town. The fact that you're seeing all of these Israeli flags here is a celebration of Jerusalem Day, of the reuniting of the city. We're now seeing, again, as in Scotland, as in the UK as a whole, schools being used as means of disseminating propaganda, where the Israeli government are getting the schools to put forward a one Jerusalem commentary, which is obviously very pro-nationalist, pro-Zionist. And this will be rolled out throughout the city. But of course, in the east part of the city, this will not be well received at all. And it's not what the people there want their children to be taught, as the Arab members of the Knesset have been pointing out. So I simply raised that as an example of a government using the state schooling system to get its message across, whether or not the people want it. It's something we're familiar with in Britain as well. The second slide was a far more troubling one, also at Damascus Gate. And if you could bring that up, what you see there is someone here who's conducted a knife attack on two border guards and has been shot. He's ringed by the IDF, who then basically empty the magazines and riddle the body with bullets. And it's captured on tape. The minister responsible in the Israeli government said over that shot, that this doesn't happen, that what we're doing is incapacitating terrorists and that is all, and we don't empty magazines into injured people. He said that over the shot, where everyone who had eyes in their head could see that is exactly what had happened. So we're talking here, even Haaretz. Haaretz is a very good newspaper. It tends to be viewed as left-wing, and in Israeli terms, left-wing and right-wing is only to do with the peace process. That now defines left and right. It's a pro-peace, forming some sort of agreement with the Arab part of the population newspaper, which publishes in both Hebrew and in English. It's mainly known for its English language work. And they are saying quite clearly that the view that the IDF is the most moral army in the world, something I have never shared, a view I have never shared, is now no longer defensible when you see images such as these.
It's a strange world, isn't it? We've got our politicians saying things which are clearly untrue. I just wanted to add this. I didn't know you were going to cover that aspect from Israel. I had this already prepared, but veterans today saying that since American police have been training with Israel, they've become particularly brutal. So they're saying that since the original training took place, shootings of unarmed civilians has gone up 500%. Attacks on legal protests, etc. So it's very interesting to see that not only have they, of course, been training American police, but they've been training British police. I'm also quickly going to remind people that with no proper debate in Parliament at all, Cameron and Francis Maude have linked up British security and GCHQ, for example, with Israeli units and Israeli universities, all linked together. We don't quite know what this is about, but there we are. We've got the International Business Times pointing out that since the Israeli army has been training London police, some interesting things are happening. So this was the original report saying that between the 1st of March, 31st of August 2014, 80 personnel were trained. And this is the key bit here. The report also found from global research that besides the London police, the Israeli army had also trained personnel from the US police force in tactics and strategy that it developed as an occupying army. Are we to become a nation to be fully occupied? I'm beginning to feel that's exactly what's happening. I'll just give you a reply on that one, David.
Yes, the IDF were founded from an irregular army called the Haganah. They were claimed to be a self-defense organization from the Jewish settlement, and in many ways they were that. There was a lot of Arab violence and terrorism directed at the Jewish community in the 20s and 30s. But they also have a much blacker past. The sinking of a ship called Petra in Haifa harbour, which cost 50 British lives and resulted in the death of over 200 Jewish refugees from Nazi Europe. This was 1940 this happened. Is a case in point. It was sunk by the organisation that later became the IDF. They spent 20 years saying it was some sort of suicide pact by the people on board the ship because they were being taken to Mauritius to be interned. It was nothing of the sort. It was cold-blooded murder by the organisation that became the IDF. So I have never had the view that they are the most moral army in the world. In fact, that's it'd be hard to find an army that has completely clean hands, because the nature of war is what it is. But using armies to police populations is never a good thing.
Totally agree with those comments. Well, just to stay on police, and particularly British police and what they're up to, Mike mentioned yesterday this incident which has provoked outrage in many people. Dog dies after being deliberately run over by police in Conway. Some amazing comments by the police. Chief Inspector Waring of the Roads Policing Unit said the potential for a serious collision was present throughout. There was no alternative way. The only safe option was to run the dog over at sufficient speed to ensure it be destroyed and would not suffer. And they went on to say, due to the seriousness of the incident, it needed bringing to a conclusion quickly for the safety of all concerned. So we have a dog on a road, which, yes, does produce safety issues, but this is such a major incident for the police that they can't cope with a dog on the road. What I'm seeing here is commentary which is nonsense. We'll contrast it with this one that we reported, which of course is a man who had dented his partner's biscuit tin, and we had some 37 police and armed police and paramedics turning up to arrest him. Well, maybe this is where we're heading on this one. Bring in global research. The UK government is installing a police state, analysis and commentary. And I have to say, this is exactly how I see it. We covered some of this with Ian Crane yesterday. I just thought I'd like to put up an email we received from Frank saying it was a very powerful show with Ian Crane. And this gentleman's then talking about the problems going on in UK, from poor pensioners to cover-up of child abuse and Jimmy Savile. But we obviously had a reaction for that.
I can just say we're going to play out that programme that you did last night with Ian immediately after this.
Okay, but what Ian Crane and myself were really getting on to was the fact that we're now into an exceptionally serious phase in UK where we are literally seeing a police state installed under our noses. And as Mike's picked up already in today's news, the community warden scheme, when it recruits young children, this is the creation of Hitler Youth. We'll just skip on a little bit here. If I may, and you've got one on war, I think, to come. Sorry, just bear with me a second. I just wanted to bring this one on screen. We're told that there's a committee meeting coming up in the 1st of March where the Defence Select Committee in London is to be briefed on the terrible dangers of Russia. Well, we had a look at who the witnesses were that are going to be brought forward to brief our politicians. So we've got James Sherr from Chatham House. We've got Keir Giles. We've got this Polish gentleman from the European Leadership Network. We've got a Mark Leahy, who's apparently from SHAPE, but if you look at what he really is a former BBC journalist. And we've got this gentleman here, Robert Pazel, Acting Director of NATO Information Office in Moscow, basically another journalist, tied in with this organisation, the Defence Academy of the United Kingdom. Sir Tom Phillips, just to ask a question really, where have these people come from? So we've got politicians being briefed in order to presumably help form defence policy. When we look at the people that are supposedly briefing them, their background is corporatist journalists, nothing to do with defence at all. Just thought I'd make the point. I think that brings us to the end of today's programme. David, as always, thank you very much for giving us a very good update of things north of the border. Hopefully we can get some common sense coming forth, both north and south. And
that would be nice.
That would be nice. And to expose this EU referendum puppet show for what it really is. Meanwhile, many people are saying to us, yes, but what do we do? We've got to continue to say, once you have the information and you understand that we're watching effectively a dictatorship being installed, you need to start talking to other people. And it is not just enough to be emailing friends and colleagues who already understand what's happening. We need to get out there and spread the word, and we need to challenge people in the media, politicians, local councillors, police, professionals, challenge them as to what they know and tell them what the truth is, because it's the truth that does the work, coupled with exposure. On that note, we'll leave you for a weekend. We will be back same time on Monday. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay.